Good morning and welcome to the Washington State University Board of Regents meeting. This is day one where we begin with committee meetings. We'll begin today's meeting by acknowledging that WSU locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude toward these original and current caretakers of the region. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting via the YouTube live stream. A link to the live stream is available on the WSU Board of Regents website. Public comment is welcome at this meeting at the designated time, which will be Friday, April 19th, after the regular agenda items. If you wish to make a public comment and have not signed up yet, you can do so by using the online form found at regents.wsu.edu, by emailing regents@wsu.edu, or contacting the board's assistant, Tracy Jordan. Public comments may be made in person or virtually. Requests will be received until today, April 18th at 5 p.m. The Regents will now hold an executive session to review the performance of a public employee and discuss litigation or potential litigation with our legal counsel. This session will be closed. The executive session will conclude at approximately 10 a.m. unless it's extended by further announcement. If any action is taken as a result of these discussions, it will be taken tomorrow at open session. At this time, I would ask everyone except our legal counsel to please leave the room. Thank you. Like, I gave that to the last. I like the microphone. Hey, Kyle, I'm gonna go.
Order in the court. Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman has wrapped her up.
Thank you, Regent Serna. Kyle, just let me know when we're ready. Good morning and welcome to our Washington State University Board of Regents meeting. We did actually close our executive session, which is why we're joined by a few other folks in the audience, and here next to me, President Schultz is with us. We're ready to get started with our committee meetings. We took a bit of a break between our executive session, again, which closed at 10, and we're gonna get started with our first committee, which is a committee that I am chairing, which is the Executive and Governance Committee. This item was slated to get started just about now. So we have 2 action items to review. I'll introduce the first item, which is the Board of Regents election of officers. As a reminder, it's stated in the WSU Board of Regents bylaws that at our regular meeting, held after the first Wednesday in April of each year, the board will elect a chair and vice chair as nominated by the executive committee and based upon the advice of the board and in consultation with the president. The vice chair will automatically succeed as chair of the board after 1 year, commencing on July 1st. The board may elect to extend the term of the chair or vice chair by a maximum of 1 additional year with no further extensions. At the March meeting, we discussed the proposed slate, and I asked my fellow regents for their input. The outcome of that discussion is reflected in the materials of your packet. So tomorrow, the proposed motion for consideration at the meeting is that I would remain and be reelected as the chair of the WSU Board of Regents for the year beginning July 1st, 2024. And that Jeanette Ramos be reelected to serve as vice chair of the WSU Board of Regents for the year beginning July 1st, 2024. The understanding is that she'll act as chair pro tem in the absence of myself as chair, with the power to preside at the meetings and to sign all instruments required to be executed by the WSU Board of Regents. As a reminder, the succession plan to follow the slate of officers would be for Regent Serna to assume the role of vice chair. Is there any discussion or anyone that would like to make a different motion?
You have no such luck.
You got the short straw. You're
keeping a pause.
Yeah, you were hoping, but no.
Is there anyone that would like for? This has been, gosh, a lot since July 1st, and it has been an honor to serve as the chair. I do believe that it is important that the chair serve no more than 2 terms at 1 year each. It's a great opportunity for a new leader to step in, and I'm happy to serve for an additional year and no more than an additional year. So,
Thank you for your commitment.
Yeah,
and the excellent job you're doing.
Thank you for your time that you've put in.
Great. Might be the fastest committee we have so far. So if there's not any other discussion, then I am going to ask that our Executive Director for Policy and Governance, Daniel Hess, present the second action item, which is a proposed Board of Regent bylaws updates. As I shared at the March meeting, these updates help to focus the Regents' time together on strategy and governance.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Oh, am I yelling? Okay, great. Well, just a little bit of background to refresh everybody's memories. The current Board of Regents bylaws, there's a presumption that all agenda items will be brought for future action 1 meeting prior to the meeting in which the regents take action. There are a couple of exceptions. They're just for routine items that typically go on the consent agenda, such as approval of minutes or items for which the board chair has suspended the future action item requirement. So this proposed bylaw revision would eliminate the future action item requirement for many agenda items. The idea is to improve efficiency in decision-making and save meeting time so that the board can focus on the more big picture, strategic, and complex matters. So we brainstormed internally, and the items that for now would still require a future action item are listed in the write-up. They include things like approval of tuition and fees, housing and dining rates, changes to retirement programs, sale or lease of real estate, capital projects, strategic planning, the athletics budget, budget requests to the legislature, issuance of debt, and adding or abolishing a college, department, or school. At the March meeting, I think it was Regent Shower also asked for some examples of items that would no longer require a future action item. And so I added those to the end of the write-up. They include things such as election of board officers and other board business, including approval of meeting schedules, bylaws changes, and Board of Regents policies, approval of Washington Administrative Code rules, new degree programs or requests to discontinue degree programs, conferring of honorary doctoral degrees and distinguished alumni nominations, and naming of facilities and academic units. And there could be a few others that I didn't list on there, but those are the main ones that I was able to find out. So essentially, the board chair retains authority to apply the future action item requirement in any case or suspend it for any agenda item. And our plan will be to revisit this bylaw change in 6 months or so to see whether it should be adjusted. And just as an aside, there was one other change. If you look at the red line attachment, you'll see there's a list of university officials who are allowed to submit agenda items to the board. And I added the chief audit executive and the chief compliance officer to that list. These are both positions that, as a matter of best practice, should have the ability to bring items directly to the board. And if you look in the committee charters, it definitely says that. So it's mostly to comply with best practices and also create some consistency among our policies. So if there aren't any questions or comments on this, we'll ask for a vote tomorrow to approve the revisions.
Unless it's a future action item.
Luckily, we covered the future action item on this, and we're ready to take action tomorrow, unless anyone has any other comments or questions.
I just want to say some of this is much appreciated by programs and faculty that are concerned about getting things through all the systems we have to get them through to become action. And so, Danielle, I particularly appreciate the articulation of things like degrees and some of the things where we really are just checking to make sure that the right people weighed in on it. We see the right people weighed in on it. We've left the core of the decision making to the people that have the expertise to make it. So I like this, and I think this was a really good idea. Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate the concept of the future action item to allow public feedback in case there is some, but in my tenure, I've never received any. So we've held off the extra meeting. So this is probably healthy for efficiency.
Go ahead.
I would just say that also the board should expect leadership to go, this might be something that is going to generate some, inquiry and additional thing versus things that would tend to be non-controversial and really routine. And so I think that also it's incumbent upon leadership to sometimes, right, not try and jam something through that you go, okay, people wanted to talk more about this, but so many things that we do is the kind of thing the board could act on at a single meeting, and it's just much more efficient because it's been thoroughly vetted by the time it comes to the board. So good point.
I also think it's important that we're retaining the ability to move anything through this 2-layer process. So I think that that's an important part of this action as well.
Hopefully we'll be able to flag some of those in the committee pre-meetings so that we'll know prior to the board meeting if something needs to be changed.
All right.
Thank
Any other
you.
feedback questions? Okay. So we'll take action on this item, both these items tomorrow, and this concludes the Executive and Governance Committee. Thank you. All right, so let's move over to the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee, and today that's led by Regent Dickinson.
Thank you, Regent Shower. Welcome everybody to our Strategic Operation and Excellence Committee meeting. Today I will be taking us through that as our committee chair, Regent Shetler, is not able to participate. We're going to start our meeting by reviewing 4 information items. At this time, I would like to invite our Chief Compliance and Risk Officer, Cheryl Carmazal, to come up and provide the semi-annual compliance and risk management profile. Welcome.
Thanks. Good morning. And I'm joined by Holly Ashkanashad, who is our Director of Compliance and Civil Rights. And I will just say probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the country on Title IX. I am going to turn the second half of this over to her. We're going to start with a discussion on enterprise risk management. And give you updates on recent scoring and on the next steps and plans. So I've been in this position 4 years. About my sign in on my computer happens to include a date that reminds me of when I started. That's not my whole password, I'm just going to say. It's much more than that, but it does allow me to sort of step back and reflect every now and then. And, you know, the first year I was here was pretty much COVID. And so we didn't get as far along in enterprise risk management as we wanted to, but we have 3 years now of sort of scoring behind us. And I will say there's some things that we're starting to grow into as an organization, but there is a lot of room for improvement in this process. It is a continual improvement process. And I continue to learn and appreciate all the feedback. We've got very, very good feedback in this round of scoring. So to step back, we started with 160 risks on a register that's had everything this university does basically, and sort of scored down, and that was unmanageable. We've worked really hard this time around. We have refined that down to 45. We are going to continue to refine that, but we also expanded the group of scoring to leadership across all campuses, to faculty leadership, to staff leadership. So that has been helpful in getting a broader perspective. And let me see, there we go. So here is what the result is this year, just in terms of ranking. Not surprisingly, you will see some things at the top that have been at the top for almost the whole time I've been doing this. Well, enrollment trends, for example, has been at the very top. Financial sustainability moved up, and I also would expect that not to be a surprise. That is something that has been reported on repeatedly. We are a unique institution in terms of athletics and Pac-12 for us as a major risk, and we're going to look at sort of what the country is doing after this slide. And I don't need to go through all of this for you, but I just sort of wanted to call out what has been sustained, and then some things where you'll see some changes. There was maybe one of the more interesting ones to me here is the way the political climate has moved up from last year. That to me feels like a scoring response that is based on what's happening nationally, maybe more than what's happening at our institution. We've seen some activity at our institution, but not a tremendous amount compared to other institutions. And in our state, one of the risks that we first included here in recognition of a need to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think one of the most interesting trends in higher education in the past year is how the nature of that has changed as a risk. It was a desire to increase it and improve it, and that remains. a high value in higher education, but as we've all seen, the backlash, the political backlash, and how that now has created a political risk in some states, not in our state. And I feel very lucky to be in a place where that is not at the top of the headlines for our state, and we're still allowed to go forward and improve. The Chronicle of Education just had an article, I think, this week about over 100 institutions that have had to take action and reduce the numbers of their offices and or terminate their offices and redistribute those employees. So this is both a list that looks at us as an institution, but is informed by what's happening nationally. Any questions about any of those? Okay. Yeah.
Just more of a comment. I think it's amazing how much has changed in a year in terms of the relative ranking on things. I think it does speak to the challenges public higher education is facing. Is that my sense, and Cheryl, you have a better, you can comment on this, is that we saw some tweaking around the edges in the previous years maybe, but this is some wholesale stuff moving up and down, quite a bit. And I think it's a reminder that I suspect next year during the presentation, it could be a different ranking depending on where people are. Your thoughts?
I agree. I was surprised by some of the changes here. And one example is one I was just talking about, the DEI move all the way down to 19, where it had been, almost in our top 10, right there at 11 and 13, and had been something that was considered to be a pretty high risk and something we spent a fair amount of time talking about. I feel like in our top 10, any one of those, based on what's happened in the past 6 months, can rise to the top 10. For example, cybersecurity. We had a very near miss as an institution that would have been enormously significant for this institution last year. And so you had me in front of you. I know ITS, when it presented on that risk, and there's been a lot of activity in that regard. And that occurred at a time when we had been forced out of the cyber insurance market, along with a lot of higher education. From my perspective, and I did participate in the scoring, it's lower this year because we've made a lot of significant improvements across the institution. On the cybersecurity side, we have some improvements that are going in to full implementation and will be in place at the end of this month. We are getting back into the cybersecurity insurance market, which is very encouraging, and we're getting lower rates because of the improvements we've made. So I think that it starting to get to a place where we have enough information to look at this as to do some trend analysis at the institutional level, and also to see how what's happening nationally is impacting what we're doing. So, but there is room for improvement. I feel like there's just always opportunities to do more with this work. Here's how we compare nationally, which is always interesting. So United Educators is one of the top underwriters for higher education in the country. And this is a survey that's sent out, 112 higher education institutions responded. You'll see we're not that different. Over on the left-hand side is sort of how the far left is the rankings from United Educators. The right hand of that gives our scores. The three that are unique to us, that amongst our top level risks that aren't in United Educators. One I've pointed out, athletics. The other one, the faculty and staff morale. We had a couple of major surveys last year that caused that to be added to the list. And then the system transition, because not every system's going through transition, and we have been through a major transition recently. So that makes sense that that's there and continues to be there. Any thoughts or questions on that? Okay. Just next focus a little bit. So we follow the ISO 31000 framework, however what people want to say it. But this just shows what that framework, how it pictures the continuous improvement cycle, and how where we are in that cycle. We've focused in the first few years of, for reasons that are obvious, on design and implementation. We are moving into, I think this year, we're really spending a lot of time on evaluation and improvement, and then integrating. Integrating both in terms of the feedback we receive, but also continuing to improve the integration of risk management and that vocabulary with leadership at the institution, and in matters that come before the board, so that, for example, here, you're going to hear about a couple of items, several items that touch on this later this morning through the employment an HR presentation, which touches on 3 of the items in our top risk list, and on AI, which is also a top risk for us as an institution and higher education, and of course, beyond higher education. So we've seen lots of improvement and integration. There are things we want to do. An idea that Leslie discussed with me that I think will be really helpful is developing a practice of reporting out to this board in a written format in greater detail on 3 or 4 of the top risks for every meeting. So you just, and getting that into a template where you can glance at that, where you can see what's happening, you can see what the mitigation is, you can see where the gaps are and any improvements in that risk. So that will kind of be top risks at a glance. We'll get to that. As I mentioned earlier, refining our list, getting to a smaller, more manageable list that truly captures what is at the top of our enterprise concerns. And those are some of the goals for this year. And unless, yes.
Maybe just a comment, risks are a significant part of our awareness and dialogue. And while it sounds scary, it's also an opportunity for us to be proactive. And so each and every WSU member, needs to think about their expertise in their work and how that poses a risk to WSU, but it's also an exercise in being proactive to mitigate. So I just appreciate you being very thoughtful about the design and using the standard of the ISO.
Thank you. When I first started, there were several people who were very concerned about having their work on this list, right? And just to the point of it being proactive, we're getting to the point where people understand that, in fact, if you have a big concern, you want it on this list so that it allows it to get the attention that it needs, the resources that it needs, the airspace that it needs, and the feedback. And then so we as an institution can start to track that at that system enterprise level. It is, and risk is not all about the risk of harm, but also the risk of lost opportunity. And I think AI is a perfect example of that we're grappling with, and I expect that our team will speak to today, because there's a lot of opportunity in there. And if we go into that opportunity with, having thought through the risks and how to mitigate the risks that are presented, because they're significant, we can be a lot more successful. So thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Holly. You have heard a lot about Title IX when I'm up here at the table. I know Provost Chilton has also provided updates on Title IX. The thing about Title IX is that it is one of the most influential laws for higher education, and it is in all parts of what we do. And I think it's very important to continue to keep that in front of you, because it's also very political. I'll turn it over to you, Holly, with that.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thanks everybody for the opportunity to speak on this. So Title IX, like Cheryl said, does touch almost every aspect of the university community and the work that we do. So it's really important to acknowledge that it's not just one office. We really rely on our campus partners to be effective in this space. I am just going to touch on some of the higher risk, constantly changing areas. I'm going to spend most of today just talking about the sexual harassment, misconduct response, and prevention, and then just briefly touch on athletics and scholarships at the end. So one thing that's important to know is we are still under ongoing monitoring from the federal government's Office of Civil Rights related to a 2018 resolution agreement that we entered into related to the university's response to sexual misconduct complaints from quite a long time ago. The status of that is somewhat uncertain. They haven't been very responsive, so we're waiting to hear more on that. We are anticipating the new Title IX regulations that will dictate how we respond to complaints of sexual misconduct and harassment will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So we will have to overhaul our processes at that time. They have been delayed several times. They are very controversial. People have lots of opinions about them. They may be further impacted by the upcoming election cycle as well. Those changes and the impacts to those regulations, it's always this swing between rights for respondents and rights for complainants. You see that represented in the changing Title IX regulations. You also see it represented in changing case law. And so for people in my area, it's really critical that we understand the challenges to these requirements and our policies so that we can make sure that we're doing a really good job and not dragging people into unnecessary litigation or process. We want to make sure that the decisions we make as an institution are upheld. So looking at the types of litigation, I've got some examples of respondent-focused litigation. So the respondent is the person who's accused of misconduct. You tend to see them alleging that universities engaged in procedural irregularities, that they had a pattern of gender bias, that there was external pressure, potentially from OCR or potentially from your community. If you're aware of sexual assault allegations, people want to see somebody expelled. We also see complaints that there was a lack of evidence to support the outcome to a case. For complainants, you see different types of litigation. So complainants may allege that the university was deliberately indifferent to their concerns. That's a fairly high bar. You have to show that the institution was clearly unreasonable in their response. You also see complaints that are related to retaliation. So the complainant experienced some negative action from the university after they filed a complaint. The third category here is the one I worry about the most. It's these pre-assault complaints. This is something that's recognized in the 6th, 9th, 10th, and 11th Circuit. It is essentially a complainant is alleging that their attack is the direct consequence of the university not appropriately responding to a prior report for the same attacker. That's really challenging as an institution because we are balancing two really important values, the value for victim rights and victim empowerment against community safety, because we have a lot of cases where somebody who's been traumatized engages with our office, but they do not want to go forward with an investigation or hearing process. And so the institution has information, but if we're trying to respect their rights and empower them to make choices, we may be trying to balance their wishes with our desire to protect our community. The next category is post-report and assault response. This is essentially an allegation that the university responded to the concern, but their response was inadequate to prevent it from reoccurring or to allow the complaining party to still have adequate access to their education. And then the final category, I think you've heard about previously, the duty of care. There is a movement to expand duty of care to conduct that's happening off campus. To be clear, we care about conduct that happens off campus. We do address conduct that happens off campus, but we don't necessarily have the same ability to control what's happening in those off-campus spaces. Some additional challenges, students aren't super interested in participating in these processes, and that has actually gone down since the 2020 regulations. So pre-2020, we send outreach to everybody we hear that potentially might have a concern. We saw about 15% of students with sexual assault reports were choosing to engage in the investigative process. That doesn't mean that they're not engaging at all. They may be working with us to facilitate support and preventative steps, but they may not want to move forward with the investigation. Post-2020 regs, it's dropped to about 6% of the student reports that we have are moving forward with an investigation.
Holly, can I just interject for a minute? First, I want to really compliment you on balancing compliance with compassion. And for the first time, I actually came with a student to your office, and I was so touched by how your office worked with this student on both here's care we can give you independent of the laws, and here's where the laws fit, and here's what your choices are. And I was very very impressed. So one question I would ask is when I see a percent, it makes me wonder if you have more students understanding that your office can be a place to come for compassion and advice, even if they're not involved in something that makes that legally rises to the level of a investigation. So could the fall in percent be partly due to the fact that you're getting more students coming in on the compassion advice education side?
It's possible. We do hear feedback from students. They don't like the formality of the processes that are in place. Okay. So one of the things we do when we talk to students is we describe what it would look like, all of their options. Here are the different paths you can take, and we answer any questions they might have. We pretty consistently hear from students that, well, gosh, it sounds like the Title IX hearing process is just like going to the police and going through court. It's a mini court. And that's intimidating to a lot of students. And it's required by the federal requirements, right? So that's a challenging space. We try to help students understand how we can help them through those processes. We also have heard from students that they hear in the news that Title IX is so terrible since the last regulations. And so they are nervous about engaging in the process because they believe that to be true. But I really appreciate what you said about our office. We do try to be really compassionate. And I think that you're right. We do, in fact, this next slide, we do see an increase in our cases. And if this went back all the way actually to 2011, you'd see that it's just consistently been going up. And we view that as a good thing. We are getting the word out to students and employees. People trust our office. They're coming to us for reports. But the increase in reports also impacts our ability to respond, right? It's just additional work on our office. It does impact timelines. I anticipate we'll see an increase this year too, especially with the election cycle. We tend to see a lot of reports around those time periods, so we'll see how it goes.
We have spent some board time adjusting the administrative code, and is that reflected? Have we done enough to help you in this process, or do we need to look at more adjustment?
Yeah, so the administrative code is now in line with the state Administrative Procedures Act and the federal Title IX regulations, which we are required to comply with. So the space that we have wiggle room to to improve the experience of students is really in the compassion and support that we as an institution can provide to them through that process. And so there is space there to work, and we work really hard on that in our space. Additional resources are always welcome because it takes a lot of work to help people through those spaces. We also rely pretty heavily on our community partners, so our local victim advocates at each of our system campuses and the main campus. We work a lot with those folks. They often will come with students and engage in the processes. Our student conduct process also has advisors that will help students through that process as well. It is challenging though. There's no question about that.
How about that gray area between where you're touching on what's potentially a criminal act versus general student conduct? Does that touch your office?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you asked that. So when the 2020 Title IX regulations came out, they are actually for very specific egregious conduct. They don't actually cover a lot of other forms of sexual harassment, but our community, anytime we change our policies, we get a lot of student and community feedback on what those would look like. And our community felt it was really unfair to treat students who had experienced that level of harm differently than somebody who was coming in for a different type of harassment complaint. And so we tried to extend processes and make them really similar kind of across the board so people would get the same kind of experience no matter what their concern was. But I do think you're right that there is space to really reconsider that, because as we've seen it played out, yes, we are treating everybody the same, but providing those same rigorous processes for all different forms of harm, maybe that's not critical. And maybe we've seen that that's not a very efficient way to move some of the cases forward. Yeah. All right, some other internal challenges. We just are consistently seeing more and more attorneys involved in these processes, which can be challenging for staff. In my office, it's also challenging for the student conduct office and puts additional burden on our assistant attorney generals as well. Staff burnout, that is not unique to WSU. This is hard work, it's emotional work. People experience a lot of vicarious trauma. But we work very hard to try and make sure our staff feel supported in the work that they do. And then I put this last note here just because I find it interesting, but our office handles student Title IX cases, but we also handle all the discrimination and harassment cases for students and employees. And employee discrimination cases for far less egregious conduct are often far more time consuming for our staff than student Title IX cases and can impact capacity. We often have employees that are in pretty heightened emotional states when they're engaging with our office. So I'm going to shift gears unless there's any other questions on sexual harassment and misconduct prevention. Just briefly touch on athletics. I know you've heard a lot about Title IX compliance. So I'm not going to really dive into that today, but just note that CCR, my office, is continuing to work with the athletics department and providing support as they're working towards Title IX compliance. But one key area that we are monitoring is as it relates to transgender athlete participation. Last year, the Department of Education issued a notice of proposed rulemaking on athletic eligibility under Title IX. They did propose a rule that you can't have a policy banning transgender students from participation. They provided some limited allowance for schools to adopt policies to limit participation, but that was specifically for more elite high school or highly competitive college sports. They provided zero guidance on what that would look like, though. This is a very controversial area, so we're continuing to wait and monitor to see what that's going to look like from the federal government. Around the same time that they proposed those rules, NCAA also published their transgender student athlete participation policy, again with a goal of preserving opportunities for transgender student athletes. That is supposed to be in its full implementation this fall. It's largely related to medical thresholds, and there are pros and cons with that as well. So we will monitor these areas moving forward. Switching gears to our final topic, scholarships. So this slide is just the basic requirement. So the implementing regulations for Title IX require that we prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex when administering financial assistance. That includes prohibiting solicitation, listing, approval, provision of facilities or other services, assisting any foundation, trust, agency, organization, or person who provides assistance to students in a manner which discriminates based on sex. And if we are receiving financial assistance from wills, trusts, bequests, we have to administer those so that the overall effect of those awards isn't discriminatory. And so the way WSU does that is through what's called a pool and match approach, where we look at the applicants and we identify applicants who should be awarded scholarships for non-discriminatory reasons, and then we match them to scholarships that might fit that specific student. The reason this is important is that there has been a pretty significant increase in complaints to OCR about universities violating Title IX for scholarships based on sex. I also note here, we're also seeing that as it relates to scholarships based on race. WSU has not been immune to this. We did have a complaint for our posting and administering of scholarships for female applicants. In response to that complaint, we removed the posting to this externally administered scholarship, and we also provided information about our pool and match protocol. It was dismissed. But this is a challenging area because, scholarships aren't just posted centrally. We've got colleges and departments and faculty that want to make sure students have information about these scholarships. And so it's kind of something that we need to make sure that we're providing enough information to our university community to stay in compliance here. So as part of that, we did consult with Student Financial Services. We provided some guidance on that. We've also developed training, which we'll be providing soon. And we're hoping to kind of keep an eye on this moving forward. That's all from me. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Holly. Charles, anything else from?
No, I think that's it. As you can see, Title IX touches every office. There's all kinds of risk weighing that we do when we look at those issues, for including, for example, the scholarship issue. But thank you for the time. Always appreciate that, the opportunity to be here, and welcome any questions that anybody has.
Thank you very much to both of you. We're going to take a 5-minute break here. We just are having a little technical. Is that right, Lisa? So nobody, just pause for a second. Elizabeth, you'll be up next, I believe, but we'll just take a quick break here.
here really make.
All right. The board's ready to reconvene, so.
Okay, thank you,
Regent Dickinson.
Thank you, Regent Schauer. Okay, we are going to get back into our strategic and operations excellence committee. I need to express to the speakers that are on deck, we are about 30 minutes behind. And so if you can please be concise and move through your presentations in a way that still allows for board questions. So next up, at our March meeting, Provost Chilton and Interim Vice President for Research, Mike Wolcott, provided a research overview and expenditure report for WSU. The Regents have invited both back for a follow-up presentation to address some of the questions that were sparked from that discussion. So at this time, I'm going to invite both, and I'll turn it first over to I'll start with Provost Chilton, and maybe you can set the stage for us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this opportunity to provide more detail on some of the presentation elements. I'm really going to pass the mic to Interim Vice President Mike Wolcott. He and his team, I work with them closely on this, but he and his team really put this together. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Okay. Thank you very much, Provost Chilton. So I'm Mike Wolcott. I'm a Regents Professor in the College of Engineering and the Interim Vice President for Research. So we're presenting today to follow up on questions you had in our last Board of Regents meeting, specifically with regard to the research enterprise at WSU. I want to note that I had an error in the slides that I noticed in prep this morning. So if you're looking at the ones that are on the materials, you'll see one slide that's changed. And we get those, yeah. So I've been making Kyle work harder this morning by having to switch out slide decks.
And we'll make sure we get you the correct
slide
deck.
Great.
So I can move us along maybe when these are coming in. So great, thanks, Kyle. If we just go to the next slide, or I can do it, right? Yes, perfect, excellent. There we go. Oops. Okay, great. So there were two slides in particular that I just want to reference from our last slide deck, and this was the research expenditures coming from the HERD survey, and these are historical ones that go from 2008 to 2022, which is the most recently published NSF numbers. We've actually developed, in conjunction with Chris Hoyt's team in institutional research, we've developed our 2023 numbers, and we've submitted them to NSF, but they're not yet available because NSF hasn't approved them yet. So the basic piece of this is that we've been getting historically increasing research expenditures in here. Oops, there we go. Okay, great. And so in this other slide here, this is slightly different than you saw before. We just presented it in a bar chart. And what we see in here is that while we have increasing research expenditures on the red bars, we've been having declining unique PIs, or faculty that have been receiving these. And so this sparked a lot of the questions with regard to what we're going to talk about today. So I just thought I would put forth. So we went through the last Board of Regents meeting and recording, and we looked at these. And there were basically three substantive questions within there that we could address. So number one was, what happened to the other category in those expenditures? And you'll see here that this is in green at the very top. And you see that it kind of disappears after a couple of years ago. So what happened to that category in the NSF HERD R&D expenditures? And then secondly, you requested that we break out research expenditures and where they come from. So we took that as sort of cost sectors on there. So we'll look at. And then lastly is, what are the factors that influence the changes in unique PIs? So those are the three questions. So basically the presentation just aligned with those three questions. So we'll address the first one here, what happened to the other category. And so basically in the other category, the expenditures were previously categorized in other, have now been sort of integrated into the primary categories. And this is through a kind of a continual analytical improvements. And this is, working very closely with institutional research. I think Workday's helped on this aspect, and they've really been tremendous in in working with us on here. So these methodological changes that were finally implemented in FY23, so these are the numbers that have been submitted that aren't in the graph here, really looked at increased accuracy. So we move closer to the data and we move away from assumptions that we had in previously. Now that we have Workday, much better data, we can drive directly to the data on that. Increased transparencies, so that when we make decisions and they're documented, but these are also defensible in this, and we can be open about what counts in what categories in this. And then lastly is increased collaboration amongst the different units. So really we have folks within, of course, the Provost's office through Office of Research, but also Leslie Brunelli's in finance and Chris Hoyt's office with institutional research and others. So it's really a team effort along this line. So, research expenditure accounting is key to WSU strategy. And one of the reasons for that is that, is one mission. Research is one of our 3 pillars of a land grant mission. So in order to accurately assess that, we're assessing one of our missions for this. Secondly is benchmarking and ranking by the, I realized I was doing it on my computer, but it's different up here. So benchmarking and ranking sort of allows us to do direct comparison to other institutions and look at WSU's progress over time for this. Institutional health, because growing expenditures in the research side shows a healthy university in this. And then last is recruiting, because top researchers are attracted to investment in expanding sort of knowledge and economic growth. I mean, all of us as faculty, we are lifelong learners. That's why we're in this sort of business. And we do that in conjunction with our students. And so having a healthy research enterprise is really critical to getting top faculty and retaining them. So the question too is to break out the research expenditures and where they come from. So what we've done is we got a couple slides here to look at the cost type within WSU, with WSU's and our institutional peers as they're reported to there. So this is a little bit difficult to see, especially in terms of the legend on the bottom. So I'll interpret these for you. If you just look at the WSU one right now, which is the bottom one along this line, the red is salaries, wages, and fringe benefits. So a bulk of research dollars, roughly half of them, go towards supporting individuals. And I'll just tell you as a faculty member, a vast majority of that goes to supporting graduate students. So it's really critical to our teaching missions on this. And then the blue ones here are other direct costs. So these are goods and services, they're travel, things along that line that are needed to move forward. The yellow ones are indirect costs. So those are our recouped indirect costs, or F&A as we call it internally in this. And if you look at that, that's about 24%. That's of the total project costs on there. Our indirect rate for government projects is 53% of modified direct costs. So when you convert that over, if you didn't put anything in there, it'd be roughly 33%. It's about a third of the budget. So we're a little bit less than that. The reason why is some agencies will not pay the federally negotiated rate. And so we honor whatever the agency will publish. And then additional to that, we have off-campus ones. So it's a different rate for off-campus because we're not using campus facilities and so on and so forth. And then the orange in here is R&D that's passed through to subrecipients. So we collaborate with other universities or corporations sometimes, things along that line, national labs, and we pass money to these. And then equipment that's capitalized and software. So one of the things you look at compared to our peers, I mean, we're roughly in the ballpark of the salaries in this. We tend to spend less on other direct costs. We're a little bit higher in our indirect recovery rate on this. And then the other components are roughly the same. We do spend less in terms of capitalized equipment, and that's equipment, say instruments or things along that line to help us do our research. And that's an interesting finding that I learned by doing this. This here slide, oh, darn it, I got too many things going. Okay, so this slide here is simply showing in different comparisons to our peers. And the only thing I want to show on here is that you'll see that this, say the amount of the research expenditures that go to salary can vary by over 60% down to around 30%. And we're roughly on the high side. So we're spending a lot of money, mostly supporting students, graduate students in this endeavor for there. And I think that's an interesting sort of assessment of that. So question number 3 is what factors that influence the change in unique PI? So why is it, are we getting a decreased participation in unique PIs for this? And so one of the components of this is we're not able to address that yet. We're currently doing additional analysis on this. We have to tap back into through institutional research. We have to go back into some of the demographics of our faculty and where they are and whatnot. We've downloaded now back to 2016 data on all awards. So it's not quite the same as expenditures, but they're similar. And so I got a little bit of data to show on that, but we don't want to extrapolate too much because we don't know exactly what this will look like. So what we've done in here is we've broken this out by college. And so these are the top 5 colleges. What we see in this is that this is historically what we've looked at, and we get a significant drop after medicine for this. So we have these colleges are top 5. They're a bulk of our research expenditures in there. So what we see is that at the Ag College Connors is the highest, and it's been increasing the highest too. It's actually increased over this time frame by 83%. And all of them have increased, like our overall expenditures have, with the exception of arts and sciences, which has actually decreased 13%. And the other ones have gone up about 20% roughly in there. So they're fairly similar in that sort of vein. If you look at, in this case here, if you look at sort of the unique awarded PIs, and this was the slide that was in there. I had a copy paste error in doing the final slides. If you look at this, what we see is that, Connors has dropped 12%. Pass has actually increased 7%. So despite the fact that their awards have gone down, their participation has gone up. Also, medicine has gone up 67% in terms of unique PI. So that's really significant. And love to talk with Jim and Daryl a little bit more as to what's driving that. And then lastly, we see that engineering, which is VCA and vet med, have also decreased in terms of these. So we do see these differ across the colleges, and so it gives us sort of a natural experiment to look a little bit further in our data analysis on that, which is what we're doing right now.
For those of us not used to the lexicon, what is a unique PI?
Right. Okay. So for instance, right now I probably have about 5 or 6 active awards. Okay. So you pull those down, I'm the PI on every single one of those. So what happens is, oh, I'm sorry.
Just
right.
To be clear.
That's right. So PI is a principal investigator. So that means, so if it's a project that I'm running, I'm the principal investigator on that. I might be on 5 of them, but I'm only one unique, principal investigator for the count on that. So what we're seeing is that, there are fewer of those, and they will, in the data analysis that we're seeing now, there are many that have, many grants associated with that.
Can I ask another question? We had the opportunity to meet at the National Science Foundation, all of the chancellors with Kirk, and one of the questions I asked was about that because federal funding is tending to go towards these large multidisciplinary grants where you might have a PI, but then you have co-Is and other collaborations. They're actually moving away, percentage-wise, the amount of funding that they give to the traditional basic research. Right. Do you think that some of this, as an hypothesis to test, could be because you've got a unique PI, but you might have a bunch of co-Is and other faculty who are working on the grant but are not
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it is one of the things that we have looked at. So we've looked at that by basically taking unique PIs and unique co-Is. So a co-I is based, or co-PI is basically, if I'm leading a grant, but Kirk is working with me on it, then and he's doing a more minor part, then he's a co-principal investigator on that sort of piece. And so what happens is that we've looked at that and lump those together, saying, well, are they part of the, bringing the grant in? And we're still decreasing. Yeah. So, that was a hypothesis I drew early on with that too, because we are seeing a lot more large grants. So, and actually the next slide speaks to that a little bit. What we see is in almost all of these cases, we're seeing increasing average grant sizes. So these grant sizes are increasing over time for that. And then that results in teams of researchers working on that, as Provost Chilton said. And so what we see again on this part here is that Connors at the Ag College has the largest increase in this area, where arts and sciences and medicine have been roughly the same over time on this. And engineering and vet med have increased sort of in between. What you see on the blue line there, that's actually vet med, and the line underneath there is green is medicine. So those are the largest grants, and that actually corresponds to HHS types of agencies typically have larger grants associated with those, especially NIH and all the HHS agencies really on this. One of the other things to note is that there's been an increase at the very end in terms of engineering for that area to there. So that's it. So if you don't have any questions, I can buy you some time, but I'm happy to.
Questions for Mike?
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the grants and the colleges? So for instance, the process and how we're able to increase some of these numbers. So I was looking at the screen, and there are 3 colleges that have a decrease. I'm looking at the right awarded. What's the plan? How do we change this? What's the plan to increase?
Right. So, so as the Office of Research, well, let me back up. So servicing the research enterprise of faculty is coordinated out of the Office of Research, but actually all of the campuses and all of the colleges have leadership, in the research side of things. So it's not just the Office of Research that provides sort of services, but it's also the campuses and colleges. But in general, what we see is support for faculty on pre-awards. So what that means is we have to write a proposal. There's a lot of effort in these proposals in terms of pulling materials together and so on and so forth, where the principal investigators and their co-principal investigators write the technical narrative to those pieces. There's just a lot of effort in pulling together complicated budgets, pulling together the materials and making them uniform across the different individuals participating in these. Many times these bigger grants have multiple institutions. We collaborate with other institutions on this. So getting all their materials in and whatnot to put the grant submission in. So that is all before an award is made, is when we actually submit to proposals on that. We have grant writers that assist on those, review the grants, snappy up the language a little bit in terms of things with this, or make sure that there's, things are correct and so on and so forth, help on all that formatting and efforts on these. And these can be extensive projects that go over months of time on these big awards.
I would also just add the seed grants to allow faculty to have pilot data and proof of concept are also key, and we offer those again at the college level, department, campus, and the Office of Research. But those are really have been a key priority too. Otherwise, your success level really drops.
The other thing that we've done seed grants on this. What we've also done is leadership workshops. So they're semester long where, say, a younger faculty wants to start leading bigger grants, and then we work with them over the entire semester, work with them on preparing, ideas and materials, have other successful research leaders come in and speak with them, mentor them afterwards. We have brand new faculty just on straight, just on the mechanics of writing a grant, on these sort of pieces. So there's a number of different pieces that we do along those lines to help support that activity.
Do you feel like there's a plan to increase awards?
Yeah, and I think there's one of the things that we're doing right now is in the strategic planning exercise. We have a component to that within the Office of Research. In that exercise, what we've done is to actually poll the deans in terms of where are their strength areas that they see in terms of growth and potential. We've then analyzed that across the different colleges and brought together some cross-cutting theme areas that are also of interest to agencies which fund research. We've then vetted that with the campus chancellors, with faculty, and now we've formed a research competitiveness working group that's comprised largely of ADRs and BCRs, but also some of the leading research faculty on that. So that activity is ongoing right now, and we have plans in the Office of Research to maintain that. We might change the composition of it a little bit, change their charge, but keep that as sort of an advisory group moving forward on that. And that group is looking at how do we make these strategic plans actionable? What are the programs that would help on their college and campuses, or as they see in the large research programs that they're running?
Oh, no, please, Laura.
Oh, okay. So strategically, it sounds like things are evolving really well. What happens in the whole grants process? Because you mentioned the complexities of basically putting together a grant and having it ready to move forward. So that sounds like some of it is just a lot of budgetary layout and number crunching and figuring out what the right budgets are and how to. Is that handled all out of your operation, or?
So there's really two parts of it. One is the actual scientific narrative technical component. And there's a lot of inspiration in terms of that aspect of things. And that's what the faculty actually do, right? They're the technical experts with regard to that. And then there's a whole set of processes like you talked about, which, and I spoke about earlier, which are surrounding those, which are the non-technical components to the grant. So those are service. It depends on the grant size and whatnot. So we do have grant writers within the office, and they tend to focus typically on bigger grants or grants where we're trying to put together researchers from across different colleges or campuses or things along that line. But the departments and the colleges also have those individuals also in there. So
there's been a huge increase in compliance in
yes.
applying for federal funding, and that can actually be a huge impediment. I once had a grant turned back because when you sometimes turn a Word document into a PDF, it creates a third blank page, and because that particular document was limited to 2 pages, they rejected my grant out of hand for $800,000. They didn't even look at it. I mean, that's the level of scrutiny that we have to provide. And that turns a lot of PIs off, and they're just like, forget it, or they'll go for smaller grants or something easier to apply for. So we have a number of staff, but the group that Mike is pulling together is really designed to assess where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, where can we make sure we're getting research development staff out to help faculty with the non-technical aspects of applying. Yeah, so that sounds like that can be a big hurdle.
It can be, especially as grants grow larger. There's more people working on them. You're still limited oftentimes to 15 pages. So actually getting that idea down to a shorter length is difficult. So that's a growing effort on there. And we've been quite successful. The success rate of these larger ones, when these grant writers work on them, is significantly higher.
So do we have enough people doing that? It sounds like
no.
Yeah.
Probably not, but right now I think there's a number of areas for that. So what happens is we actually lost a lot of those for a variety of reasons, including budgetary. And so then actually a lot of people stop using them because it's there. So now we're ramping back up. We've done some rebudget in the office. We have 2 grant writers now, or a second one will be coming on as soon as we finish the hiring process with that. And so we're ramping back up in there. And then that part of the office is actually going out to faculty meetings and talking about what they do and what they can provide. And as soon as we did that, they went into pharmacy, met with their faculty on it. The next week they had 4 or 5 grants working with them on it in terms of things. So there is a need out there.
I'm going to just keep us moving along here, so I apologize. So Kurt, did you have a final comment?
Fast. I have 2 things. The first is, I think this is good board practice where the board brought up some questions at the last board meeting. I appreciate Mike and Elizabeth working to directly address those particular things so they don't float out there and go, nobody ever did it. The second thing is we clearly have to grow the research enterprise, are going to have to add more individual PIs. And the question is, if you have 10 slots, where do you put them? And I think as Mike and that team does more work, it just provides more background information on where those strategic areas might be. And I think this is the advantage of the data analysis and diving in, is it just gives us better information to be more strategic. So we don't just hire and then 3 years later go, well, we're not seeing the results. So we thought, I think it all goes into our strategy moving forward. But I think that's one of the limitations. How do we bring more PIs on board into an environment where they can be just as successful as their colleagues who are obviously doing great work now?
And I think the other thing, I'm not going to try to elongate this so we finish with it, but the other possible bottleneck is post-award, and making sure that all the billings are done on a regular basis so that the money is coming back in. So, having headed up a grants program myself in the past, that could be kind of dicey sometimes. So
right, and so we have in recent years worked very closely with SPS, which is the unit within WSU that actually does the billing, sets up the budgets internally, collects the funds, brings them back into the university. And we've had enormous improvement in that. Again, that's done through collaborations with the office. The other part that I wanted really briefly on is that, faculty have a lot of jobs inside, a lot of different tasks that they do. And what we want to do is we want to keep them working on their research and their teaching. That's what they're uniquely able to do, or working on service and outreach, with groups outside of WSU. That's what they're uniquely able to do. Not necessarily repairing things in their laboratories or doing a lot of this sort of paperwork. So how do we have the support staff for that? So one of the things I've done now is started to work with the foundation in terms of seed grant opportunities that they have through the foundation. Can we coordinate more and collaborate more to get better coverage on that? We started working directly with facilities to understand sort of where are those research hotspots that also have real needs on the facility side of things, and how can we team up together on these? And so I just spoke with HR today to understand some data within the faculty and how they're changing. So the Office of Research working with other units in the university, I think, is crucial to support the faculty enterprise, keep them focused on their science and their work as PIs and teaching.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to pull all of this together for us.
Thanks for your interest.
Yes, very helpful and timely. Okay, we are moving into our next portion of our agenda here, and our next information item will be presented by Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer, Teresa Elliott Cheslick, who will share an overview of WSU's Human Resource Services. Teresa's presentation is following the series that were introduced to the Regents under this critical operation area of finance and administration at WSU. If you remember, back in January, we heard from our Vice President and Chief Information Officer, Tony Opine, as part of this series. So this is our next phase of it. So welcome, and please introduce your guests for us, and glad to have you here, Teresa.
Great. We're really happy to be here, and we will expedite our presentation. The good thing with HR is we're very adaptable and flexible, so we can move along really quick here. Can you just click through to the third slide? So I'll introduce the team really quick, and then we'll move to kind of some of the concerns employees have raised recently and how we're addressing them, and ask for any questions that you might have. So I'm Teresa Elliott Cheslake. I am the Vice President of Human Resource Services and the Chief Human Resource Officer. With me today at the table is Jennifer Klein, who is the Senior Associate Vice President for Human Resources. And then I have our Director of Disability Services and our Labor Relations Officer, Kendra Shea. And then also in the audience, we have a number of HR leaders who are here on campus providing trainings and meetings to the Spokane campus employees. If you guys want to just raise your hand. Ann Monroe, who's the Director of Benefits Services. We have our Compensation Director, Melissa Donato. Our colleague of the Spokane campus, Teddy Ferris, is here. We have our Talent Acquisition Manager, Bonnie Wilmoth. Am I forgetting? I don't know. So we'll move on then. So we'll move to the employee engagement survey, just to the results there of the top concerns. And then we can talk through some of the processes HRS is doing to address those concerns. So these are out of the biannual employee engagement survey that HRS conducts. And I forgot learning and organizational development, Laura Hamilton, who actually leads this and conducts this survey for the university and compiles all the results, sends the information out by college and campus and unit so that they can create action plans. Many of the concerns the employees have raised were also identified in Charles' presentation. So the top ones are wellness, professional development opportunities, improving our leadership skills, compensation, and did I say wellness activities? I'm not looking at my notes, so I'm going off the top of my head here. And so what we'd like to do at this point, just in the interest of time, is open up to your questions. Or do you want us to go through our slides of how we're addressing some of the concerns? What would you like?
I think, why don't you do a quick highlight, perhaps, that can give good context to then some questions.
Okay, so then I'm turning over to Jennifer, and Kendra will kind of talk about some of those concerns.
Thank you, Teresa. So one of our top concerns, and I think you all also saw that on Charles' presentation from a risk perspective, is our recruitment and retention space. So within HRS, we do have a dedicated team, our talent acquisition team, that's led by Bonnie Wilmoth. This team really looks at providing guidance out to the units. They sit with folks, they talk through strategies. We now can utilize those types of methods instead of our maybe post and pray type of strategy that we used in the past. And we really can get in and talk and listen to the stories that people have and try to understand what their recruitment challenges might be, what's worked for them in the past, make recommendations so that they can get qualified applicant pools as well as get a qualified candidate in for hiring. Some of those services also lead to some of our long-term goals. So really what we've been working on is identifying WSU as a brand. What does that mean? Getting applicants in, spreading the word through social media and through other channels. That's one way that we address recruitment and retention. On the next slide, I do have some data elements in terms of recruitment data, and you can see that we have been on the climb over the past 5 years. This team does go out and interface with communities across the entire state, as well as in other spaces. As you can see there, we've done about 14 career events this year. We have initiated a lot of faculty and staff recruitments. Our applications are consistently on the rise in terms of numbers of applicants into the WSU system. And so that's one of our top risks are one of our top concerns that we hear consistently. Are there any questions on those first two slides?
When I see that, you know, you've been using Workday on sort of initiating the recruitments, has that really helped with the efficiency?
So when we moved into Workday, we did have some slowdown at first. So it's a new system. It takes folks a little bit of time to really get in and adjust to what that system can do and how it was so very different from our other system. But what we see now is changes in business practice and changes in process have really changed, and we are becoming a lot more efficient in the recruitment space. We've reduced the number of handoffs between HR and units, for example, in order to speed the hiring, especially in a market where it's very demand. Talent is in demand.
So I know different areas are have different issues, but for, let's say, faculty recruitment, like how long with this new system, is it a quick posting, you know, once it's been approved at the appropriate level, or how does that work?
So we move through the process. And so it will move through a approval process. So it's initiated, reviewed, and then it's posted for a specific amount of time. Applicants are released into the search committee just as soon as they come in, so they can start that review period. And so we do try to expedite all of our recruitments. They're prioritized because we know people are also aligning those with national advertising and local advertising. Folks are going to conferences and want to be able to talk about the vacancies that they have out there. So we do expedite those just as quickly as we can get them out.
And then sort of on the other end, you know, once the selection is made, how long does it take before you can get an offer letter out and that type of thing?
Pretty quick. We do have templates and we have tools out there for folks, always just making those tweaks, right? That sometimes the devil's in the details a little bit there in terms of what does that maybe startup look like, or those types of negotiations. But in terms of getting an offer out and in hand, that's a pretty quick process for us. Employee turnover. So this is something that we just wanted to discuss. We're asked to specifically address this concern in employee turnover. So as you can see on the chart, we are trending down in terms of employee turnover since 2021. We did use Workday data. So this is our 3 years that we have in the system. We also compare that to CUPA HR data, which stands for College and University Professional Association for Human Resources. And across the country, you see these same types of trends, and WSU is in line with turnover from CUPA as well. And we did break it down for this slide in terms of our different locations. You can break it down in a number of different ways by employee type, et cetera. But for purposes of today, we broke it down by campuses. Questions on our turnover data?
I just think this is important, and I appreciate you all sent this a month or two ago, and I asked where that came compared to everybody else, because I think there's a bit of rhetoric out there that our turnover rate is increasing and it's much worse than it was some number of years ago. That's not supported by data, and I just think this is important for us to see. It doesn't mean we can't improve, we can't do things better. It's just, but we're not an anomaly here, and I think that's really important for us to see. And this is a place too where Workday gives us reproducible data year over year. And before, sometimes I think you all had to pull stuff by hand and stuff, and it wasn't quite as easy. So 3 years from now, we'll have
it, Kirk.
Yeah, what's that?
I said we couldn't even pull the data.
Yeah.
Workday. This is left to right, most recent to oldest, right? Am I reading this right now?
Yes.
Yes.
So on the right is 21, 22, 23, 25. So it's going down, not going.
Yes.
So you use employee, is that faculty, is that all employees, or is that?
So this is broken down by all employees here. I don't have in my numbers, but I do have in my pocket So if we wanted to look at turnover by employee type, for example, we could break that down. I didn't provide that on the slide here, but we also see decreases by employee type. So if we looked at our civil service, administrative professional, we did grad assistants as well, and faculty turnover rate, you see that decreasing. So in faculty specifically, in 21, we were at about 21.37. In 22, we were at 20.27, and in 23, we're at 14.98. So we do see continued decreases also in our employee types. That's not to say I haven't dug in, is there employee turnover in a specific unit? Haven't dug that far deep, but I can say that overall in employee types, we do see that trend down as well.
Would you be able to attach this data to anything in particular, or why that might be?
Why that might be happening? So there's a lot of different changes, obviously, in the market at large. We do have a lot more visibility in terms of WSU. We are also talking a lot about the great benefits of working for a state agency. We can't compete with the private industries that are in all of the communities for which we are also members. And so we really do tout the great benefits that we have and get people involved. We also address things, for example, through the employee engagement survey. And we are trying to address some of those concerns that people have through that type of outreach.
And actually the applications we've received, we don't have this data here, have increased tremendously. So what that says is people want to work at WSU, or at least submitting information to work at WSU. Our pools have increased. I mean, the job market has changed over the last couple of years, very different. But yeah, the people interested in working at WSU has significantly increased.
Say that our increased flexibility on remote and hybrid also has helped increase the pools, just given the nature of.
Yeah, I would say offering hybrid or fully remote has increased, definitely. And our benefits, the flexibility we offer to our staff and faculty is also very positive. So we've really, working with talent acquisition, the rest of the team, getting that information where somebody outside of WSU can find it, to see why should I want to work here? What are some of the benefits? What's the information? Our benefits team put together a total compensation information. So for retention and also for recruitment, all that data is very helpful.
So I'll just, I think it's really important that we just name things and that we try and both celebrate as well as, tackle the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. And so this data is really powerful. It's not what we're hearing.
Yeah.
So we're hearing that, friends that have been here, a part of the WSU system for years, are leaving. Numbers are tough when we're in the business of people, because these are each individuals. And there is a cultural impact to turnover and the length of time between I need someone to replace someone who's left and I actually am able to go through the whole process to be able to hire someone. So I'm curious if maybe we can kind of even pivot to what, from your perspectives, is a plan to collaborate to help solve some of what feels to me like growing muscles around change management, because we are needing to be an evolving organization that is capable of pivoting and being agile and changing, which we've demonstrated over the pandemic we can do. But how we address some of the cultural challenges right now between we have high turnover and the data that I'm looking at that would say, actually, we're doing really well. We should be celebrating the changes in our turnover, or even the recruitment data. We are recruiting and we're seeing significant numbers of folks want to be part of WSU compensation. So those are probably the three things in my mind. These are really helpful slides, and I'm trying to balance when I'm hearing our stories, kind of a pain, and if this is hard, to, gosh, statistically, we're doing really well.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was just going to speak to the faculty piece of this, and then, because I know that's some of what you're, yes, or a large chunk of what you're hearing, and then okay, love to hear you augment. So we, earlier this spring, sent out the coach survey. You've heard about this before in 2022. That's the Collaborative on Academic Careers in Higher Education. And it's a really comprehensive survey of faculty to get at things like the nature of work life, tenure and promotion, resources, shared governance, leadership, whether they feel appreciation and recognition, and retention and negotiations. So if they've had retention, what the nature of that process was. And so based on the 2022 data, we implemented a number of programs to address that, which I won't go into for the sake of time, but doing it again in 2024 allows us to look at, did our interventions help? What are new things that we're seeing? And we've communicated this broadly, both the results of 2022 and then also the importance of people participating in the 2024 coach survey. We can report that back to you. Those were the faculty side of this. It's, you know, nationally, anyone who reads the Chronicle of Higher Ed is seeing work about faculty morale. You know, they're burnt out, or a lot of us are burnt out, but our faculty were right at the front end of things, trying to pivot their courses on a dime, keep their research going, have kids at home maybe who are also homeschooling remotely. And so there's a high burnout factor, which is national, but then locally, how do we address it? I think this survey data will help us get at that. So I just want to.
I was really happy to hear you use the word people, because when you often are looking at the data regarding benefits and salary, and what we sometimes forget is within there's everyone in this room is a person that data comes down to. So yes, we every day are talking at the local level to employees from, you know, the groundskeeper to the president on concerns and, you know, within their area. So there are concerns throughout the university, and also there's perceptions. So one area may be having difficulty recruiting or difficulty with turnover, but the overall data shows differently. So we can't naively say that's how it is throughout the entire system, because it isn't. We know there's pockets of good managers, and we know there's pockets of bad managers. I mean, we see that every day. So working with providing information to, I would say one of the fundamental things is to get to those line level supervisors and managers who interact on a daily basis to faculty or employees and help develop their skills. And that's been one of the focuses we've been working on, is supervisory and leadership skills, communication, decision-making, how you interact with employees, how you make those tough decisions. We actually are at the System Leadership Collaborative every month. The president gracefully gave us, you know, time to present leadership training to the most senior leaders of the university. It starts from the top down. You have to have those skills to lead, and those are people skills. They're the soft skills that I would say WSU really needs to be focusing on. We have very smart people who can tell you black and white budgets and stuff like that, but it's those skills of interacting with employees, interacting with the community that are critical. We also, part of the reason we have Kendra here, we know there's frustration with employees. We, you know, with labor unions, you know, that's throughout the country. Often seeing that as a way to maybe get things that they're requesting, salaries, additional time off, and so on. We're very lucky to have somebody as skilled as Kendra, who leads the labor relations effort for WSU, who can provide that guidance to our leaders on how, you know, new student government, or I'm sorry, graduate assistant, totally new for the academic side of the house. We've had unions on the, you know, business side of the house, and just, when was it, today or yesterday, sent out all, you know, developed all this training to help with supervisors on how to manage under a contract, for just that recently, you know, the group that just certified. But there are, you know, concerns out there. I don't know if I answered your questions, if there's other, yeah, go ahead.
I'm looking at the employee turnover data, and it's only a 3-year window.
Right.
How does the employee turnover in the last 3 years compare to, let's say, if we took 16, 17, 18, or 17, 18, 19?
we weren't able to pull that data. It would have had to be done manually.
Okay.
It wasn't, and the reason it's 3 years is because that's how long we've had Workday. So, I mean, I guess there could be ways where you could kind of look at.
No, that's okay.
It's just, it was like when
I don't want you taking
Kirk was first hired, he asked me for
them
turnover data, and I was like,
no.
That'll be like 6 months out. You thought we were idiots. But anyway, it's like, it would be manual and we can't do it.
Yeah,
no, patiently waiting.
If it's manual, I'm not asking you to do it. I was just curious.
That's why.
Let's keep moving through. I'd like to just see you touch on a couple of the additional slides that you have, if you can.
Absolutely. So compensation, just really quickly, in our employee groups service, we do engage with OFM for special pay and targeted range changes. It's a constant engagement with the leadership at OFM. Our administrative professional compensation group, I think you've all heard from Melissa Janotto on our AP comp plan and that structure that we implemented in 2022. Wage compression is also a concern. Kendra, do you want to talk about wage compression?
Sure. As Teresa was talking about, I'm the labor relations officer for the university. I think we're all aware that in the past year, WSU has engaged in negotiations, collective bargaining with the UAW for the initial, for WSU, academic student employee union, and really only the second unit in the state for this type of employee. The contract provides for a very substantial and generous wage package. One of the concerns raised throughout this process, in addition to the ability for departments to fund the agreement, is also the wage compression associated with the now much higher salaries for graduate assistants as compared to some of our faculty members. So that has come up consistently. So luckily we have Workday. So we've been able to run reports and throughout negotiations to say, if we're agreeing at this rate, we have 44 individuals that we will now have people paid over. If we agree at this rate, now we are paying our graduate assistants for a full-time equivalent over 217 people. Faculty are being paid lower than graduate assistants. So one of the wage compression matters that are right in front of us, especially in some of the trainings that I've been doing. I've been doing leadership training for the contract as well as individual, are how the contract is going to impact kind of upwards. But along with that, I am also currently engaged with the PERC, who is the Public Employee Relations Commission for the state of Washington, and UAW for our first faculty contract. Well, excuse me, our first faculty representation case, which is related to postdoctoral faculty. So that is currently underway. But the impacts of our current contract to our current employees and future costs have been a large talking point at many of my sessions with academic areas and other areas training on the current contract. Any questions on that?
Thank you.
Sure. And we've already addressed, I'll mention wellness really quickly. We were able to carve out an FT on one of our benefit staff members to focus on wellness. That was a continual concern our employees have. So she implemented a lot of enhancements there. We can move on to the next screen. I already talked about some of the enhancements to our learning and organizational development group. I do want to emphasize they also oversee our staff mentoring program and executive coaching. And again, the leaders of leaders. Do you want to go ahead and move on? And then we can move through this if you want to just get to the one on employee recognition real quick. Thank you. We are done. But I do want to highlight, can you go to that one slide at the very end? I do want to say we have, as you all know, really good employees at WSU. HR, I tell my team, we deal with like the 5%, and that takes up our majority of our time of the kind of issues of performance or disgruntled employees. But we have really great employees at the university, and many of them we might not even see on a daily basis. I just want to mention that we just recently recognized the employees at a simultaneously broadcast event that was at 8 sites, including Mount Vernon, Puyallup, over 350 employees there. President and Chancellor DeWald hosted from the Spokane campus. It was really great. And we recognize our Crimson Spirit winners. With that, that's just a positive. I know we work with people. I want to say something happy about people. Are there any other questions for us?
Thank you very much.
Thank
we appreciate
you.
all three of you being here. Thank you. Next, we are moving into an Artificial Intelligence Council overview and update. And today we have presenting to us Provost Chilton, Interim Vice Provost for Academic Engagement and Student Achievement, Bill Davis, and Associate Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Community Standards, Karen Metzner, and they will be providing information about WSU's AI Council. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to, you introduced them perfectly well, but just to say that this Artificial Intelligence Council that I pulled together a group last summer, really with the explosion of AI, not that it came out of nowhere, it existed for some time, but just the advances in AI and how they would affect research, teaching, academic integrity, what were not only the systems we need to put in place to evaluate and make sure there was academic integrity, what are the opportunities for teaching and how do we take advantage of this? So I'm going to turn it over to the team here to talk about the work that they've done and share with you some observations.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Well, when we were getting ready for this presentation, we wanted to start off with a little bit of level setting information. The concept of artificial intelligence is far from new, but we're really focusing on generative AI, which is really exploded in the last year. So generative AI is the idea to create new, air quote, content from existing data. So music, art, photos, writings, the types of generative AI are expanding, and the systems use the information that they have been trained on to reproduce a new result. It isn't just one system. There are many, many tools out there, and seemingly there's another one every day. It's kind of hard to keep track of all of them at this point. And the implementation of artificial intelligence within higher education and other places varies dramatically based on the context, the field of study, the specific situation. And so we'll touch a little bit about that in a bit, but really trying to wrap your arms around it at a system level versus a specific level has been a fun adventure. So as we were getting ready and we thought, gosh, what would I want to know if I was a board of regents about artificial intelligence? We thought maybe we should just ask ChatGPT and then just call it a day. And so we asked ChatGPT, what should a board of regents for a public institution know about AI? And it answered for us. So ChatGPT has identified 9 areas. So we just are going to leave this up as our last slide since we know lunch is next, and call it a day. Really looking at understanding the basic concepts, recognizing the benefits and the ethical concerns, and balancing both of those. Managing data privacy is a huge bucket that I've been able to learn a lot about through serving on this task force. Using resources to be strategic about it, supporting education and training. So these are the things that we have been focusing on. And just for context, for those of you who haven't played around in ChatGPT, when I asked this question the first time, ChatGPT gave me a mini dissertation, and I asked it again and again, can you make it shorter? Can you make it shorter? Can you make it shorter? And this is what ChatGPT self-edited so that we could get it on one slide for you today. Just another example of generative AI. This is an example of Microsoft Copilot, which is, we'll talk a little bit more later about. So similar question, you are a member of a task force, you're attending a Board of Regents meeting. What are the opportunities and challenges that we should talk about? So you can see that there are similarities between this list and the list that ChatGPT produced, but they're not exact duplicates of each other. And that's where you get into the nuance of different systems and different training methods for generative AI. So with that, I will pass to Bill.
Great. Thank you, Karen.
you know, part of the challenge of AI is that, at least for me, and I think for many other people, it feels like this is one of those things that's hit us fast, it's hit us hard, and it continues to evolve, as Karen said, on a daily basis. One of the challenges we had when we started to think about and wrap our hands around what does AI look like, how is it going to impact a complex institution like WSU, we first had to recognize that there is going to be sort of a human part of all of this, and keeping humans in the AI part of this is going to be really critically important. And so what we continuously had to remind ourselves about, and what we heard in our conversations with people as members of that council, was we had to be reminded of the fact that when any new technology or new concepts come along, there's going to be an adoption curve associated with it. This is from Everett Rogers, his work on the diffusion of innovations. And what he points out is, you know, and this is repeated over and over and over again, it doesn't matter if it was social media back in the 2010s or the internet in the 1990s, there's going to be thresholds of comfort that people have for adopting this. And so what we see are there's going to be a group of people that are out in front of everybody else, and they're going to be our innovators. And we're going to hear from a couple of our innovators here in just a few moments in different aspects of AI and its use at WSU. Then we have a group that's going to be early adopters. They're going to be not quite at the lead of the pack, but they're going to be jumping on that train as it starts to pull away from the station fairly quickly. There's going to be an early majority who kind of sees how things are playing out. When others are joining in, they're going to join in freely and very confidently. And then we're going to have others who are not going to get on the AI train as fast as others. And there will be some people who will still be laggards even to this day. And so as we've developed things on the council and keeping this in mind, here's sort of an overview of what we've been doing in the meantime. I'm involved in multiple organizations at the national level. I've had several people come up to us when they've heard that WSU has an AI task force and ask us, how did we do this? Because they've been spinning their wheels on their campus. It's too big, it's too complex, there's too many people to get around the table. And basically my answer is we just jumped in and we identified the areas that we thought were going to be the most important for us to tackle first. We got people around the table who were wanting to engage in that conversation, and we went off and started doing it. So in spring of 2023, we were one of the first task force on this. We tried to include membership from across the WSU system, again, to get that diversity of voices. Very quickly, our work started to frame around 4 different aspects of generative AI. The first and foremost is data security. If you've read any of the literature about things like ChatGPT and others, that's one of the first things that people get concerned about is what happens if we put in private information or sensitive information about individuals. Its impact on research. When the council was first formed, many of the research organizations at the national level had not come out with any guidance about AI. They were in the same boat we were. They were trying to figure this out. Ethics and privacy, of course, are first and foremost in everything that we should be doing here, especially whenever it comes to a technology like this. And then the impact on teaching and learning. Many of the loudest voices that we've heard on this have been not only our faculty and our instructors, but also our students who are looking at generative AI and asking some really important and very hard questions about what impact it was going to have. In summer of 2023, we issued our task force report. And we've launched an AI website. We continue to work on this. Part of our work this semester and into the fall is to really take a look at the landscape, improve those materials, update them with what's already happened in several different spaces, and then start to have those system level conversations with our partners, our faculty, our staff, our students about generative AI and other concerns and other opportunities that they see out in these spaces. So what we thought we would do today to kind of highlight what AI in action looks like at WSU is to ask some of our faculty and our staff to join us today. So Karen, would you like to go on ahead and run that part? Please?
Yeah, of course. Our first guest is joining via Zoom. We have Kate Watts, who's the Director of Composition and a career track professor in the Department of English, to talk a little bit about teaching and learning and the implementation of generative AI within teaching and learning.
Thank you for your time today. I've been exploring possibilities for AI in teaching and learning for about 16 months now. And I've spent that time really exploring how AI might be a tool that supports learning and work as opposed to a nemesis to be afraid of. So today I just want to scratch the surface and share some ways AI might support student learning and or be part of complex tasks. On the left side of the slide, I'm thinking about learning which entails recalling, describing, memorizing, the type of learning that supports complex learning and complex tasks. Some AI can support students' practice and self-assessment in these areas that lead to recall and identification. So on the left side of the screen, I have some examples. Explain Paper and Genie are AI that summarize text, and students can compare their understanding with the AI's understanding and do some self-assessment. Wisdolia makes flashcards from PDFs, from YouTube videos, from articles, and students can use those flashcards to study and to get that kind of recall that is often important with factual information within a number of disciplines. QuizGecko will make practice quizzes and tests so that students can, again, self-assess and practice in those ways. In the middle of the slide, we're beginning to bridge so-called lower order learning with higher order learning. Consensus is a plugin for ChatGPT that creates similar outputs to ones I've already described. It can summarize complex texts like journal articles. Gemini Advanced can actually verify information. So you've probably heard about AI hallucinations and that problem, but there's AI that can fact check, we'll put in quotes a little bit. Both of these AI can help students self-assess or support their thinking and learning to facilitate more challenging tasks. On the right, I've listed some more challenging learning like synthesis, evaluation, and hypothesizing. One of the exciting tools for me as a writing instructor has been the development of several different AI that map the scholarly conversation among journal articles. So here I'm going to kind of try to provide a fast but more specific example. The relationships between and among articles are difficult for students to understand. Tools like Connected Paper, Research Rabbit, Obsidian, Semantic Scholar, and Insightful create maps visually representing the relationship among research and scholarly publications. An example of an insightful output is in the slide's lower right corner. The size of the circles and the spacing communicate the depth of connection among the papers and available research. The lines linking circles often name the connection that the AI thinks is present. So the user can hover their mouse over those circles and lines and get more information. The visual representation of that abstract thinking has helped several students in courses like English 101, 201, and elsewhere better understand the relationships among pieces of scholarship, which in turn can then, and we've seen it happen, it can definitely improve their writing when working with these complex articles. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Our next presenter is Dr. Bott, and he is also joining us from Zoom. Dr. Bott is the Raymond and Beverly Lawrence Distinguished Assistant Professor in the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction and for the opportunity to present Board of Regents. So our work is on artificial intelligence-driven reliable health applications. So as we know, wearable devices, they're being used in a number of health applications. It could be gait monitoring, monitoring of symptoms in a home environment, and so on. And one of the challenges with these wearables in the wild is that we could have missing data. So for example, one of the sensors could malfunction, or the user may forget to wear a device for a day. There could be battery limitations, and all of these lead to missing data, and that eventually leads to a reduction in quality of service for these devices. The other challenge we face with wearable devices is data disturbances. So, for example, if we train a artificial intelligence model thinking that the device would be in a particular position on the wrist or on the body, and if it rotates or if it slides from on the hand up or down, this can change how the sensor data looks like, and it again leads to changes in accuracy and potentially catastrophic situations. If, for example, a patient falls and we are not able to detect the fall. So what we are doing in my group is using AI to correct for these challenges. So if we have missing data, then we are using generative approaches to recover or impute the missing data. So let's say we have 5 sensors that we are using, and one of them is missing. So we want to look at, okay, based on the information of 4 sensors that are available, how do we uh, predict and what would the sensor 5 data look like, so that we have complete information to make our inferences. And we use similar techniques for the data disturbances, where we can use AI techniques to figure out, okay, these are all the possible disturbances that could happen in the field. So let's say these are all the orientation changes that we can anticipate that will happen in the field. Then we can account for those disturbances while we build our AI model, so that when we deploy it to patients and users in the field, it gives us a very reliable operation. So these are some of the topics that we are working on in my group, and we are again looking into a lot more new AI models, including foundation models and ChatGPT and so on, and see how we can use them in our research. So that's all I have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And last, we have Dan Welter, who is the director for the Center for Fraternity and Sorority Life, here with us in person.
Perfect. How's it going, everybody? So for AI and student affairs, we actually are really working, our challenge is time, right? I work with a department that serves about 4,000 students in fraternity and sorority life. And so we're trying to figure out how can we do more faster while still maintaining a high level of care for each of our students. On top of that, we're trying to integrate, our office leverages 3 student development theories. The first is the personal interpersonal task model of engagement. So that's how we engage with every single student who comes in. How are you doing as a person? Stepping into the interpersonal, what's going on with your organization and your relationships? And then finally, your tasks. What do we need to accomplish? What are the things we're trying to do here? We also use the social change model of leadership. I will save us the graduate level course on that and just say it's a really great way of talking about impacting change across a society. So looking at how the individual impacts each kind of realm larger than they are. So the person, the organization, the group of organizations, our community. And then last, we take a positive psychology approach. Strengths Finder, think of that space of saying like, hey, I might approach something from a really data-centric approach, but somebody else may approach it from a person-centered approach. Both of those are great, and we may get to the same solution, but in a different way. And so what we leveraged our AI to do, we use Copilot. The first thing I did was like review EP8 to be like, okay, is this gonna like get me in trouble? And turns out it's not, which is great. And so after we established that, we started to do some training with the AI. So establishing, these are the theoretical models that we're using. How can we develop a curriculum for engagement with our students that is going to help growth in each of those 3 areas? And so that's exactly what we did. We started saying, okay, curriculum, or okay, OpenAI, we want to talk about our September monthly meetings, which are focused on reintegration into campus. What are some good prompt questions that align with our 3 theoretical models that we can prompt our students with? And we've actually built that out across an entire year's worth of curriculum to hit thoughtful, intellectual questions that we can then prompt our students with to dive into how their organization experiences, their experience on campus, and to be able to drive that throughout their experience. So it's no longer a model where we're assuming one size fits all, but instead it adapts to each of the student organizations. We also use the analytics side of the AI tool. So as we're meeting with our students, we're actually putting that information, redacted with the student data, back into the AI to say, okay, what do we need to pay attention to with this organization moving forward? Kind of think of it as a MapWorks style approach for individual organizations on our campus. So then we can say, oh, this organization has identified multiple times that risk is an issue for them. And so then we're able to center that in our next conversation and meeting. So it really is helping us to be able to move faster with the same amount of resources.
Thank you, Dan.
So one last thing to kind of touch on is one of the advantages of having the AI Council to be kind of partnership with people to have thought processes and take a look at things from multiple perspectives. One thing that's happening right now in the business operations side is there's a pilot project with IT to bring in Microsoft Copilot for everyone on the campus. And one of the advantages of bringing in Microsoft Copilot is if it integrates well into our systems and it meets our safety and our legal thresholds, it would be available to everyone on campus. And that's a real advantage because many of the AI tools that are out there are fee for service, and there may be equity issues with bringing that into a complex organization. So this is a project that was brought to the AI Council by Tony Opheim and Michael Walters in IT. And they came to us and they asked us to take a look at Microsoft Copilot. And at the time, there were some concerns about data security, but they weren't the data security that you would normally think of. With most data security, you worry about information leaving the organization and then appearing in other places in the three-dimensional world, in places where it shouldn't, that could lead to privacy concerns and things like that. With Copilot, we were actually worried about the opposite, and that was not the data leaving WSU, but the data getting distributed in an inappropriate way within the organization. Meaning if somebody used Copilot to sort their email, would that email information show up for somebody else within the organization, which could lead to privacy concerns and things like that. And so that partnership is going really well. It looks like those safety concerns have been largely already evaluated. We think that that will be available to everyone starting this fall, but it's sort of a different model for how to bring AI tools into a complex organization in a way that's measured and very, very thoughtful and deliberate about how we do these things. With that, I'll wrap it up and we'll entertain any questions that the Board of Regents members have. Thank you.
Got a question on training. So let's say you decide you're able to bring this in the entire community. Do you have thoughts on how you might be able to train the student body on how to use it properly and stay out of trouble? And as well as just the entire faculty staff on how to use it and to its very best advantage.
I'll start and you can jump in. I think that my venture to guess is that our students will teach us about how to use it more so than the reverse, because I think our students are using AI to help them sometimes in ethical ways, sometimes they come to my office and talk about it. But I think that they tend to be earlier adopters. And so I think that the training will happen in some ways with our students more naturally. And I think that training on one specific tool like Copilot is not terribly different than thinking about artificial intelligence more broadly, which we're already doing. We're already talking about how do you adjust your curriculum? How do you change your teaching style? How do you redesign your assignments? What does this look like? What does AI detection look like? And so I think that if we were to have a specific tool to offer, it's really just a continuation of that process we're already in.
Yeah, I would follow up on that and say one of the advantages of a diverse council is we have people that come in from multiple different perspectives. And so one of the things that we've really talked about, especially this semester, is how do we build out that kind of training, right? What is it that people need to know? How do we get into those different populations of people, our students, our staff, our faculty, in areas of research, teaching and learning. So we're starting to move in those directions and think about how do we bring those people that are sort of maybe in the middle of the curve along in those trainings and get them up to speed? And then how do we start to maybe even support those that may be reticent to do this with what we think are better practices?
Well, I agree that the students are likely to be early adopters and probably still using it, but there's a matter of using it properly and ethically and so forth, that there might be some advantages to having training capabilities in that area.
That's another place where I think the classroom is a perfect place for that too. Our instructors can be teaching students in real time about how to use AI. We know that this is going to be integrated into, if not all, the vast majority of careers moving forward. And as an educational enterprise at this institution, this is something that we should be doing with hands-on, right? And that's another opportunity I think that we're poised to take advantage of through the work of people like Dr. Watts and others across our campuses.
I should also mention that I've heard that a number of high schools are already incorporating this, and some of the faculty I've spoken to have said that their children have already been using it in schools, and so some of them may be more savvy than, say, I am in this, and so I think it's part of a larger educational trend.
We have one more question here for Regent Ramos.
Well, sort of a statement. I guess I just want to say what your work is so important. It's important not just to WSU, but how Washington State citizens need to prepare for the future. So just to connect the dots on that bigger global thinking, you know, please do think about the 39 counties that we're in also, how we're going to extend our outreach and position ourselves to be actively engaged in the discourse and leadership for the state. So really important work. And I just want to compliment you on the people-centered nature of your presentation, and all the presenters were awesome. So thank you.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
You mentioned equity issues. Explain that.
Yeah, so I'll give you one example of equity issues that I think about. So ChatGPT, that may be something that people may want to adopt in different areas, whether that's in research, whether that's in the classroom or in other avenues. But ChatGPT has sort of multiple levels of functionality. There's the freeware version that anyone could tap into right now with an account and use. But in order to get much of the really useful technology side of it that would be important for teaching and learning at a deeper level, it's a paywall. And not all of our students may have the resources to get access to that, especially our Pell eligible students or students from rural areas that are learning online and may not have access to proper resources at times. So we need to really think carefully about that. And that's why I think having something like Copilot is really important, because if it's available to everyone, then we can build off of that as a point of equity, as a foundation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Clarity. Okay, thank you very much for joining us and for the report. Great report, and thank you to the individuals who participated as well. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, next we are moving on to our future action item, which is WSU Spokane Chancellor and Executive Vice President Daryl DeWalt will present the WSU Strategic Plan. Daryl.
Thank you, Regent Dickinson. In front of you are the first of two guiding documents that the health sciences will put forward. And this is the WSU Spokane Strategic Plan. The next will be a WSU Health Sciences plan that will come in the future. You'll note that this is fairly clear and crisp. It is 4 goals and objectives with metrics embedded in them. I think it's an easy read and it's pretty clear. So what I think that I would do is entertain any questions that you have at this point. Because I only have one question for you related to
really
this.
Just highlighting goal 1, the student success and support. Goal 2 is research. Goal 3, community engagement and partnerships,
yep,
which did a great job of last night. And goal 4, organizational capacity and effectiveness.
Yes.
As it pertains to those 4 goals, is there any specific questions that any of you have related to that? Okay, we'll turn it back to you then.
So I have had one brief conversation with Regent Pika about this, but the request that I would have to the board is that this could be moved forward as an action item for consideration, partly based on the fact that we will not be coming to the Board of Regents for some time for action items after this Board of Regents meeting. So I believe it would be in September before this would be considered again. My strong preference would be, unless there are concerns about it, and I would entertain any of those concerns, that we would move this forward for approval.
Is there anybody that has concern that we would be moving this and advancing it to tomorrow's agenda? Just recognizing timing wise, allowing Chancellor DeWalt to move forward and get his team rallied behind the plan. And no, okay, thank you.
Then I would say I just really appreciate the collaboration between our leadership team and the Pullman leadership team that really stepped up, Chris Hoyt and team and others who've already spoken into this and really helped us move this forward. So thank you.
Geez, thank you. Wow. Okay. Lastly, I'd like to note that today's meeting packet also included a written report provided by our Vice President for Strategy Planning and Analysis, Chris Hoyt. And there, within that it's sharing an update on WSU's progress of its overall WSU system strategic plan. So at this time, this concludes the agenda items for the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee. I will now turn it back to you, Regent Schauer.
Thank you. I think we were all anticipating we were late, but you actually completed this about 5 minutes early. So the Regents are scheduled to break for lunch at 12:30. So we do appreciate how quickly folks did make it through material. I do want to say that while we are on a schedule, the material and the dialogue is critically important. And so thank you for allowing us to maybe make some adjustments to what was presented versus having enough time for back and forth conversation. So with that, we'll be back in this room at 1:30 and we'll resume the board meeting. So thank you, everyone.